Okay, we ready? I want to just give you a little bit of other information. We talk about the Gospels, and when we're talking about the Gospels in the Christian Bible, we're talking about 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they are called the Synoptic Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels because they give a synopsis of the life of Jesus. Then the Gospel of John is really more the spiritual gospel. This is written it's the one that loved him most is the way that he was described, that John was the one that loved him most. But it's more of a more spiritually oriented than the others are. So when you hear somebody talking about the Synoptic Gospels, they're talking about the first 3. And then John being more the mystical and the spiritual and more the, heart-based kind of expression of who Jesus was. Another thing that's kind of interesting is, most of us had a picture of Jesus if you went to a traditional Christian church, a picture of Jesus, and he was really beautiful and long flowing hair and kind of lighter skin and, very Caucasian. And I didn't get a chance I couldn't find my photo paper, so I was going to print it on photo, but this is really a synopsis, a kind of an image of what he probably looked like. So you want to pass that around. Be careful not to touch the little home button and it'll stay. So that's more like what he actually looked like. When you think about Middle Eastern people who live in a desert out in the hot sun and no sunscreen, they get very dark and they were rather swarthy. And the reason that there's a theory that the reason why somebody had to point Jesus out in the garden at Gethsemane is because so many people looked very much the same, bearded, dark skin, dark hair. How do you describe a guy? He's wearing a seamless robe. Well, they might have to go look a little more closely at that. So that's more like what he really looked like. Now, that could really upset a lot of people, couldn't it? So you can find it online. It was actually done by the first time that I'd ever heard about it. It was actually in a book called Popular Mechanics. And some guy had done all this research into what he must have looked like. And that was what he came up with, was this kind of composite photo of a typical Middle Eastern man at that particular time. So, can you get that on screen? Or if you look up a composite image of Jesus, you'll find a ton of them. There's a bunch of them. So just a little bit more interesting to think of him that way, and like he actually might have looked than all of the beautiful, pretty pictures that we had in our various churches or on the wall in your home or wherever he might have been. I also want to mention that in your book list, I've given you a lot of books to look at. One of the nice things is that today, one of the books that I'll be referring to often is the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, which was written by Charles Fillmore. There are a lot of Bible dictionaries that will give you translations from Hebrew into English or Greek into English and what the meanings of the words are or the meanings of the names are according to the more literal translations. But Charles Fillmore looked at all of the different words and names and meanings and gave them metaphysical meanings. And you can get the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary through Amazon for 99 cents. I had a copy for $35 that I bought, 30 years ago. But now they're available online. The Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. And it's one of those things that's just really, I think it's fun to go look up words in there and go, oh, wow, that's the metaphysical meaning. So
that's what I've heard actually more with the Bible is it's been taken way too literal.
Yes.
And in fact, just before you left or we closed, you're saying that, follow Jesus and that, he speaks the truth. Well, when you read so much of the Bible that's out now, the only way is through him, and that he is the truth instead of the truth is the universe and blah blah blah. So then the Bible, everybody takes it so literal. I am the way, so you have to believe in Jesus Christ as the Savior instead of his actual teachings, is how I've been seeing it.
Yeah, and when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and we're going to talk about that in another class as well, I look at that and say, I am the way shower. I show you the truth, and then you can have a beautiful life. Your life can be beautiful if you follow this way. But he didn't say, he said, so it's really by my teachings, not through me. It's not intended. He never intended himself to be worshipped. He intended himself to be like, just to walk with the ordinary people and empower them with what he knew to be the truth, which just puts a whole different cast on who he was and what he teaches.
Just a little bit about what you're talking about. What I heard also, and I believe, is that he didn't write anything. He wasn't even, when the Bible was actually written by Paul, I think?
No.
Or something.
No.
Or
Paul wrote all of the epistles, the letters.
Oh, okay.
No, Matthew was attributed to be the writer of his gospel, and Mark.
Okay.
These were all, commentaries that were written down much later. That really is another thing that's important to know.
80 years after his death.
Yeah.
It wasn't even...
Sometimes
like
60 years after his death.
Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I should have put that in earlier. That's absolutely true. Again, that's why I say it's not the, unerring word of God. It's inspired word of God through man. And so as they wrote it down, have you ever tried to write down something that you did 35 years ago? And
Perfect example. We're all trying to write down what you're saying right now.
Right.
And we probably all have a different interpretation of what you just said.
Right. Or like that old telephone game, just go through the room with a sentence and watch how it gets changed. So that's why, it's the inspired word. It's the inspired word. So, and definitely, that's the other thing that I love about our teaching is that we don't take it literally. We don't take it literally. Yes. Oh, you have to have the mic.
So I'm curious, you say the inspired word of God, and, Jesus, you believe is the Son of God. So was he speaking for himself, or was he always speaking for God? Like, did he have any ideas that were rebellious toward God, or I'm just curious how that connection happens, and if you believe that like God sent him here specifically to be his speaker, and if so, why didn't he even write something down?
Well, first of all, the Hebrew tradition was oral. More than it was written. And the things that were written, such as the Torah, were written by the scribes and by the priests and recorded in Hebrew. So he was not known to be a writer, but he was a teacher and a storyteller. When we talk about, later we'll talk about his parables and how he used story to connect with the people. But I don't think there's ever been evidence of anything that he ever wrote. So others wrote about him. So, and which is why, again, why there are things that are different in the different Gospels, because they're from different points of view. And yet, when you go to the Gnostic Gospels, you'll find a lot of similarities between the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mark, which were the sayings Gospels. And you'll find there are very similar sayings in there, and there are also some that are very different. But Thomas was not included in the Bible because it was considered a Gnostic gospel, meaning by people who were knowers, as they say. And we'll get into that a little bit later on in another class, too, just a little touch of that.
But what about Jesus being the spokesperson for God?
Well, all of us can be. All of us can have that relationship. he just was the one who was able to articulate it in a way that it actually reached the hearts of others and in a way that really connected. But even he called himself the Son of Man, and called us all children of God if we were peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called. Well, it was, in some Bibles, it's called the sons of God, but in other more enlightened Bibles, it's the children of God. But good question. There isn't any evidence of anything that he ever wrote down, except when he wrote in the sand, and nobody really knows what he said. So.
Yeah, I on that note, we called him that. It's all about man that made God,
right?
In our image, as I always look at it. He never said anything. Even when they said, "Are you the Son of God?" He said, "That's what you say. I am."
Right.
I'm not
right.
saying anything. So then he leaves us, so we'll still talk about him 2,000 years later. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but it's true. We never said anything. I mean, we're the ones that said it about him. He never said it about, like, I'm special, I got the voice piece. As a matter of fact, I think he said the opposite. He said, actually, what I've done, you can do and more. So,
right.
So, hello,
Absolutely.
take it and stop using me as your voice piece. Use your own.
Exactly.
I
That's what he
interpreted
did.
him, by the way.
Right. Yeah, but that's right. I believe that, too, that he empowered us. And, there's also this saying that Jesus was the only begotten Son. But Ernest Holmes says Jesus was the Son of the only begotten God. And so are we. So, how is it that he was the only Son when we are all expressions of God? When what we are, whether you call it God or energy, or I had a lady in my church in Huntington Beach that called it Bob, whatever you want to call it. It's that higher power, that higher wisdom, and we can all tap into it. Rita.
I have a question because I was brought up with the King James Version of the Bible. And in the King James Version of the Bible, or maybe it was just my copy of it, there's passages that are written in red. Mm-hmm. And they say these are the direct words of Jesus. Do you know anything about that?
That's partly what the Jesus Seminar went about researching. At that time, I think that was the revised version of the King James Version that had the red letter Bible. I had one too in Sunday school. Yeah, I probably still have it in my library. I got a bunch of Bibles. But that was at the time what they believed to be the words of Jesus. And that's partly what the Jesus Seminar did. So if you look at the Gospel According to Jesus, Stephen Mitchell, you can look up and see what was what. And you can get that on Amazon, too. You can get everything on Amazon. Everything. So, any other questions before we move forward? Comments, thoughts? Okay, well, as we go through the class, there are several ways that we're going to look at Jesus. And I want to tell you let me just tell you a little bit about some of my favorite ways of learning about him, some of the ones that I really liked the best. I came from the Episcopal tradition. There was a wonderful bishop by the name of John Shelby Spong. And I knew who he was through the Episcopal Church, and I knew that he was a really insightful thinker. But I hadn't read anything. When I went into ministerial school, one of the very first books we read in one of our Bible classes was Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism by John Shelby Spong. I later got to take a class with him up at Asilomar. I got a chance to actually sit down for about 15 minutes with him at one point and have a conversation with him. He's still around. He's not out as much as he was once speaking, but he has such an enlightened view of the Bible and the teachings. And, of course, he was a great spokesperson for the fact that there is nothing in the Bible that condemns homosexuality whatsoever. And he takes issue with anyone who wants to say there is. He also talks a lot about feminism and patriarchal, and I just love the man. So that book, Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism, if you want to have a good read and want to have your had turned around a few times, I would suggest reading that book. So he's one of my top favorites. Another of my favorite books is by a man by the name of Marcus Borg. Marcus Borg was a Lutheran minister who later became an Episcopalian. I got to spend a week with him in a seminar, him, John Dominic Crossan, who wrote The Historical Jesus, and Joan Chittister, who is the most amazing Catholic nun feminist on the planet, who's not afraid to say anything and still stays in the church. They can't kick her out because she'd probably, but they did a whole week-long class on mysticism, empowerment, and resistance. That's what it was about, the whole week. And so I got a chance to really hear this man as well. But he wrote, the first book that I read by Marcus Borg was Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time. And then he wrote another book called Reading the Bible Again for the First Time. And he's very much in alignment with what we are and who we are and what we teach, and has a great understanding. And so does Spong. Spong thinks we rock. I mean, he just loves our movement. So those are two people that are not part of New Thought, but yet have contributed in the contemporary world very strongly. Another book that's much older, but also an incredible book, is Phineas Quimby, who wrote Spirits in Rebellion. No, he didn't write Spirits in Rebellion. He's in Spirits in Rebellion, but he wrote the Quimby manuscripts. Quimby was really one of the very first teachers of New Thought back in the day, in the late 1800s. And a woman had been in a terrible accident, and she came to him for healing because he was a doctor, he was a philosopher, he was a whole bunch of things, an inventor. I mean, he was one of these geniuses. And this woman came to him because he was known to practice the healing techniques of Jesus. And that he had studied how Jesus healed, and so he used those techniques and helped other people heal. And he was particularly upset with the fact that at that time, the churches, the Christian churches in New England, were preaching hellfire and damnation. And if you've ever been in an old New England church, which I have, built in the 1700s, the pulpit is way up here. And the pastor would be speaking down at the people and kind of telling them what evil sinners they were and that they were going to hell and they were condemned unless, of course, they accepted Jesus Christ. And so Quimby just found that offensive. So he started teaching these practices of healing to help counteract the sickness that these people felt inside themselves after being, treated that way. Well, this woman that came to him happened to be Mary Baker Eddy. Mary Baker Eddy started the Christian Science Church. She later denounced him and said that no, she had gotten all of these, teachings herself directly from God. But it was Quimby that started that. So Quimby writes a lot about the healing of Jesus. So that's another one if you're really interested in knowing kind of some of our more metaphysical healing background. So I like him too. So let me think, who else did I want to mention? Well, Stephen Mitchell, I mentioned him. And then the work of Ernest Holmes. And one of Ernest's books that you can also get either through the archives from Science and Mind Foundation, or you can order it from your own Center for Spiritual Living if you wish, is this book, Words That Heal Today. This is a classic work by Ernest Holmes, and it's Ernest's interpretations of the teachings of Jesus. The only thing that I don't like about this book is there's no index, and it doesn't really go in any particular order. It kind of rambles around. So you can't go, what about the book of Matthew and read just Matthew. It's all over. But it's a really wonderful book. I have, you can see, marked it up and highlighted it. It's just a really good book. So that's another one that I recommend. He also has one called The Hidden Power of the Bible. And of course, the Science of Mind textbook. So all of this is kind of a conglomeration of all those things. But I want you to know some of the other resources that you can go to if you happen to kind of find this just an appetizer and you want to know more. So where did I leave off? Oh, that Jesus was a divine being. Any questions? I kind of ramble on, so please interrupt and ask if you... Yeah, Michelle.
So with all the different religions that are under the sect of Christianity, is that why there's so many different versions of the Bible? Like, is there a particular Bible that the Lutherans go to, that the Episcopalians go to?
No, they all kind of have their favorites. There is the American Standard Bible, I believe, is the Bible of the Catholic Church. That's the one that the Catholic Church uses the most. But no, the other ones are kind of like, various versions of it. I grew up under the King James Version. That's, kind of, how I grew up, and then found later these other translations. And Revised Standard Version became more popular because the language was more contemporary. But I don't think there's one particular Bible that certain denominations use. I may be mistaken about that.
Yeah, I was just curious because I don't really know the differences within.
Yeah.
Because I grew up Catholic too, and it was very much like if you were you were Catholic or not.
Yeah.
And if you were not, you didn't really learn much about it. So I didn't know like why there's so much animosity even between all the Christian groups.
That's theology, because theologically they have different viewpoints. Martin Luther broke from the Catholic Church. He had big issues with the Catholic Church. Number one being the Pope, that he didn't believe in the ineffability of the Pope. King Henry VIII broke
His own
because
religion.
he didn't like the idea that he couldn't get divorced, so he started cutting heads off instead. But so, that's kind of a strange start for the Anglican Church, but, the Anglican Church, thankfully, was one of the ones where you didn't leave your brain in the parking lot. That was what I always liked about it. So there were just a lot of different, viewpoints. The Methodist Church, John Wesley, they all started their own theologies. They all had their own, viewpoints. The Lutheran Church has very, very, very strict. The Geneva Church is like super strict, all the way over to the Evangelical Lutheran Church, which is almost as liberal as the United Church of Christ, which is just 2 steps away from how we are. So, it just depends on, that continuum where you are in it. So, yeah. The difficulty is when somebody is told that this is the absolute truth, and if you don't take it exactly the way we teach it, you're going to a very bad place. And actually, there is no very bad place. You get to have that right here. So, yes, Walt.
The only denomination or sect that I'm aware of that has their own translation, I think, is Jehovah's Witnesses with the New World Translation. Otherwise, I think they used interchangeably, but that's the only one that I know of.
Yeah, I did not know that. So they have their own.
Isn't that just another interpretation of the teachings of, do they believe in Christ? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Jehovah's Witness, right? And so isn't that just another interpretation, just like any of the other Bibles that were written? So how can it be new, or how can it?
That's a whole other discussion. I was just commenting on that the Jehovah's Witnesses have a particular translation that has a name to it. So if I am ministering to someone who's Jehovah's Witness, I would read from that version because it would use the word Jehovah usually for God.
Yeah. And Walt does hospice work, and I did hospice work as a chaplain also. And when you go in to see a patient, a client, you're working with whatever their tradition is, and you leaving yours in the car. So.
One more over here.
Yes.
Okay, so I was raised Mormon, okay, and I enjoyed my childhood. It was good because it was all kindness and everything. And one of the things that Joseph Smith wrote about the Bible, he says, we believe the Bible to be true as far as it's translated correctly. And it gave us all a point of view that we could go to, and so we could question it. We didn't have to say, this is the law, Of course, there's other things, but...
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, it's so interesting because part of this it's so much what your background was. I mean, I loved Sunday school. Back we didn't have videos and stuff. They had these little flannel boards with all these little characters that they'd put up, and they'd tell all the Bible stories, and I loved the Bible stories. Yeah, I did. So I didn't have that other stuff. It wasn't until I got older that I got some of that other stuff. So, okay. So Borg, I want to talk a little bit about Marcus Borg and 3 ways of looking at Jesus that comes partly from Borg and partly from my other notes as well. First, that we have different ways that we can take what we've just been talking about. The first one is, like I was saying, this idea that it's the absolute word of God and that's it, taking at face value that which was written and said about him in the Bible, believing that what is written is all true, okay? Well, already we're talking about how many different ways it was interpreted and so on, so that's pretty hard to do. So we challenge the idea of believing because there's so little distinction then made between pre-Easter Jesus and post-Easter Jesus, as though they were all one thing. The idea of believing means that one must believe that Jesus was God in human form. Your question about that he knew he was the Messiah, and that he's bowed down to and worshiped. That's the idea of believing, that it's got all this kind of fundamental stuff. That's not what the pre-Easter Jesus ever demanded or rejected, either one. That isn't what he was about at all. He came, he was remarkable, he was revolutionary, he had an uncanny ability to speak to the common man through the parables that he told and stories that got to the heart of what he was trying to say, of things that were important to them. He spoke to them according to their own culture. They were agricultural, so some of his stories had to do with seeds and sowing. He, had family, and he got stories that were right to the heart. But he wasn't supernatural, okay? That wasn't who he was. Then secondly, we can look at Jesus as a teacher, which often you hear, the master teacher Jesus. We hear that in our teaching. And then that is to live as Jesus said we should, okay? The more moralistic view of Jesus. So we speak of him that way, but we also speak to him through science of mind and religious science and new thought as the master teacher, the way shower. As I said before, that when he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, I like to see that as I am the way shower. I'm sharing with you the truth. And if you follow this and you follow these teachings, your life will be better. You'll have a much better life. So, like I say, I don't call myself a Christian. I call myself a follower of Jesus because I think his message is one that, for me, supports many of the things that I value in my life. And I relate to his stories. The story of the prodigal son, I've been every one of those people. And I've also been the mother who's absent from the story. I've been her too. And I always bring her up because while all that stuff's going on, she's grieving her son who's gone. And she's the one creating the fatted calf in the kitchen, when he comes back, celebrating. I love his social gospel. If you do this unto the least of these, you do it unto me. That's the one I don't understand why that isn't being spoken in these traditional fundamentalist Christian churches. You never hear that. You never hear that. When he talked about, you visited the sick and you healed the sick, you clothed me, you fed me. And the disciples say, but we haven't done that to you, Lord. He says, no, but when you do it to the least of these, you do it unto me. And, that was his directive for us, to be caring for those who are struggling and having difficulty. Where is that? That's a part of, I think that's one of the biggest parts, that we're all interconnected. We say what we do to one, we do to all. How we treat others is how we treat ourselves. How we treat ourselves is how we should be treating others. We do unto others, as we are to do unto ourselves, right? That's the golden rule. Then I'm reminded that I must keep the inside of my cup clean. You know, he talks to the Pharisees about how they just clean the outside of the cup. You know, they're always walking around praying, and they had their phylacteries on their foreheads to show how pious they were, but they were forgetting to clean the inside of the cup, the part within us, and he's telling us that. So these master teacher way showers, you know, these are the things that he's teaching us to do. You know, stay aligned with Spirit. Work with, you know, clear out the things that are disrupting your life or obstacles to your joy and your happiness and your wellness. What is within me is far more important than what's outside of me, right? That's part of his teaching. And then there's the transformational Jesus. To have this genuine relationship with God. That is what he came to show us. That's the way shower. To have this genuine relationship with God. His conversations with God. Going out into the desert and being still to really hear that message that he needed to hear. And moving from Jesus the man to Jesus the Christ. And Spong says it as, in order to have become the Christ, he first had, or to become divine, he had to first become fully human. He had to experience his humanity. I got goosebumps saying it. He had to experience his humanity in order to become the divine. He had to. How else could he have been that great example for us had he not? Had he not done that? So we see that. And in that, we also get to see our own transformation of our moving from that place of being the human to the divine. Or like, I love what Patrick and Rita have been talking about in what is it, resonating with it? No, what is it? Vibrating with the divine. That's, you know, that's our ultimate goal too, to be able to have that connection and that contact. And it's possible and it's available to all of us. It's available to all of us. He never said that he was the Messiah. You know, and the closest that he got to that was with the woman at the well, when she said, "Oh, you are he." And he said, "Go and tell no one." And of course, I'm sure she ran to town and went, "Guess what? Guess what?" So his teaching pointed away from him and pointed toward belief in God. He was not telling everybody, "Worship me, put me on a throne." That's the last thing he wanted. But he wanted us to see this higher power and this higher wisdom and realize it was part of us. That's the more mystical teaching of Jesus, to see that the story of Jesus is our story too. That's the way I like to approach the Bible. These are all stories about you and me. You know, we can put ourselves in so many of those stories. I mean, I know one of the ones that I relate to deeply, because I went through several marriages, is the woman at the well. You know, when I read that story, it makes me tear up, you know, because he spoke to her. She was a Samaritan woman. He was a Jew. He wasn't supposed to speak to a woman, much less a Samaritan. And yet he saw her for who she was and offered her this living water, which was the spiritual water, the spiritual energy, the spiritual truth. You know, to me, that just speaks volumes about, you know, whoever you are, I'm not judging you. I want to share this gift with you. So that's really powerful. He was a Jew, not a Christian. There were no Christians. He was a Jew. Christian came later. The Jews taught the law. And this is where it also gets to be, this is where he disrupted everything. He taught the spirit of the law. He didn't teach the law. And he based out the law on their scriptures. And today, if you know rabbis today, they still do this. They will argue over the scriptures. They will, you know, how many angels are dancing on the head of a pin. They are very much into that. And countless hours of arguing over the most minute details of God's law. So Jesus wasn't interested in that. But the politics of Jesus' day, at that time, for the Jews, was this politics of purity. This was what it is about. That's why he referred to the cleaning of the outside of the cup, but not the inside. You know, and Jewish law is based on purity. And a lot of that was very practical, very earth-based, you know. That had to do with the kind of food they ate because, they didn't want people to die and get sick. And that's a lot of why they had things like not eating pork or not eating any animal with a cleft hoof, because you could get sick. You could get trichinosis. You could get a lot of awful things. They didn't know that's what it was, but it would make you sick. But the law was really based a lot on that. But that was the way it was, about purity. And, you couldn't touch a woman if she was having her period because she was unclean. You couldn't touch certain things because they were unclean. But Jesus taught the politics of compassion. He taught the politics of compassion. Ernest Holmes says this. He said, "He turned the world upside down, teaching forgiveness and passive resistance instead of an eye for an eye, blessing the poor, the wayward, the lost sheep, scorning the wealthy, the arrogant, and the powerful." Well, I can tell you that didn't make him too popular among the hierarchy, did it? So then Borg goes on to say this. He says, Jesus was a spirit person. He had an experiential awareness of the reality of God. An experiential awareness of the reality of God. And I know that that's available to all of us, but all of you have had some kind of a glimmer of that in your experience in life. Every one of us has been given that little window, that little spark of the divine that tells, oh my gosh, this is so real. And so that's what he had, this awareness. And it was vivid. And it was frequent subjective experiences of another level of reality. That's where Jesus frequently lived. He called the Father Abba, which is most like Daddy. Abba, Daddy, Father. And he had an intimacy with God like that of a small child. He spoke, this is still Borg, he spoke with an authority flowing out of his own spiritual experience. People experienced a presence around him which was palpable and contagious. That's why he drew all these crowds to him, because there was just something about him that drew people to him. And we still have great masters that have been able to do that. Amma. Do you know who Amma is? The hugging guru. She's a beautiful lady. She was at the Parliament of World Religions in Melbourne, and I got a hug. But you could just feel her in the room. Just emanating this love. So people have this incredible ability to do that, and his was palpable. He shifts the focus from believing in God or Jesus to being in relationship with the same spirit that Jesus knew. That's what he wanted to do, is to open this door for us to have that relationship. That's why he taught us to pray. We're going to talk on another class about the Lord's Prayer and look at that, and then in context with spiritual mind treatment, how they look. He had no sense of separation between himself and God, spirit, whatever. So he was a spirit person. And second, he was a teacher of wisdom. He spoke in parables, in short sayings, and he taught a subversive and alternate wisdom. And we'll be talking about some of his parables in a later class, but he told a lot of stories. And the thing that's interesting about the parables and telling the parables was that people would get them on different levels of understanding. You could get it at the literal level, but then you could look deeper and get the deeper understanding and the deeper meaning behind it, and then finally personalizing it to, oh my gosh, this is me, this is my experience, this is how I can be, or I am, or I've been. He was a social prophet. He criticized the elite, and he advocated an alternative social vision. Again, that made him dangerous. And he was a movement founder. Jewish renewal and revitalization movement challenged and shattered social boundaries, and that's what became the early Christian church, was that he started this movement, and out of that came the Christian church. And initially, I will say that a lot of the very first leaders in the Christian church were women. And they met in people's homes. And it wasn't until a little later that the Romans began to realize that, this it was really another way of making power. They took the teachings of Jesus and turned it into the church. And, if you look back at some of the things that came from different parts of the world and paganism and so on, they just incorporated them into their teaching. Easter is a big example of that. So, a lot of that was utilized, again, politically later. But the very early teachings were this social movement. And that was the early church. Borg says he was also a radical, which we'll talk about more next week, a revolutionary, a feminist, and a healer. And so this was who he was. This is the Jesus of the Gospels, but not necessarily the Jesus of the traditional church. So that's the difference. And, good, we still have some time. So the Pharisees said, he's dangerous. Let's oppose him. The leaders of his day said, he's criminal. Let's execute him. And the people said, he's divine. Let's follow him. So this was the Jesus of that time. So, any other questions or comments or thoughts? Rita, did you have something? Oh, I thought you were going to say something.
I haven't had time to research this, but when I went to this one really neat Greg Braden thing, one of the things that he commented, the early scriptures, the word prayer was never used. It was always in communion with God. And that was Christ, to commune. And that's a lot more personal than praying and even asking, but actually communing with God. I haven't had a chance to look that up, but I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
And I like that very much. And it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because what is prayer except going within? And what do we do in Science and Mind Treatment? The first two things we do is to recognize the presence of God and that it's within us. That's communion. Yeah, beautiful. Oh, I love that. Anything else? Any other thoughts or comments before we move into a little bit more material? Which I'm glad we have time for, because I didn't know we would. So let me just go to my notes here, because I'd love to talk a little bit more. Let me see here. Go back. My particular favorite gospel is Matthew. I love Matthew. So that's the one that I like most, and it's the one that I refer to the most. I don't know if you have particular favorites, but that's mine. Anybody else have a favorite? Okay. Anyway, you haven't looked at a Bible? Yeah, I know. You see, that's the thing, too. I haven't really in a long time either. It was really nice to get to start this class again because I had to go back and find all this stuff. Did you have
Is
Rita?
Matthew the one that talks about the latter days?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, that's farther back.
Matthew 24.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm
Let's look
thinking,
it up.
I don't know.
I'll tell you in a second. Yeah, do you want to look it up? Here. I like this. This is my favorite Bible, is the NIV Study Bible, because it has all kinds of wonderful references and historical background and context of where things happened and how they happened. And there are a lot of references to George Lamsa, who is the translator from Aramaic, so I like that too. But that's a wonderful Bible if you really want to get serious about studying. Stephanie.
I threw away the Bible years ago as well. And then I think it was about 2008, 2009, I ran into Neville Goddard. And Neville Goddard, what he did for me was he opened up the fact that the Bible is not literal. And I was taught that it was. And so when I started looking at through it his eyes, I spent a year going through the Bible and found some of the most beautiful analogies of life written in through his interpretation that just woke me up to the Bible is extraordinary. And yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I was right. It is Matthew 24.
24?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's that
And
whole
what
big-
does it say?
Well, it's long, but it's all about being deceived and how they're going to be handed over to be persecuted, and this is going to happen and that's going to happen, and how dreadful it will be for those days for pregnant women and mothers, and pray that your flight will not be taken in the winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great distress. I mean, it's supposed to be. We studied it in the Mormon church.
In the
That's what
Mormon
I
church?
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, and
It was
see,
about the latter
again,
days.
I would bet you that the Jesus Seminar said black marble, boom.
Well, it was read in that book.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I'm starting from scratch, and from my childhood, I don't remember what is the story of the prodigal son and the woman at the well. So, what would you recommend as a starting place if I do want to have the background of understanding the Bible, but from a metaphysical perspective? And this is something I want to share with my family. There's so many resources. Where do I start?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I would suggest that maybe you start with something like Words That Heal Today. This is not going to give you, I don't know, let me think. Where would be a good place to start? Gosh, that's a good question. The Metaphysical Bible Dictionary might help you, but the story of the prodigal son, we'll be going into a little bit of detail about that in a later class to look at the interpretation of that. But let me think, what would be another
Also,
one?
in the Science of Mind text,
In the
at the end,
textbook.
they have the teachings of Jesus.
Right.
And they have the different stories and the metaphysical interpretation of them. Right
Yeah,
in the
and you
Science
know
of Mind
what? And they're
textbook.
all in the back of the book.
Right, and they're simple because there's just there's maybe 12 or
Right, that's
13 of them
good.
or something.
Yeah, and then you'll kind of get started right from this rather than from, more traditional.
And-
But yeah, that's great.
and- Yeah,
Right in the
and
back.
he also tells you where they are in the Bible. He tells you what verse they
Yeah,
are
what
and
verse?
all of that.
So you can look it up and then look at it. And also, there is a wonderful online reference source for the Bible called BibleGateway.com. I put it, I think, on your paper there. You can get all these different translations of the Bible there. And you can get King James, you can get NIV, you cannot get Lamsa, that's not in there, but there are a lot of different variations on the Bible in there, and you can just click on them and they'll come up, and you can look up passages or keywords, or just read entire chapters, whatever you want to do. But that's a great, easy way to, find the Bible and just find what you're looking for easily and quickly. So it's a great reference. You can also cut and paste and, copy it and so on. So, but yeah, those are all really good things to know. Oh, let's see, where shall we go from here? I think, well, let's just go back to the birth. I think that would be a good place to go. Back to the birth of Jesus and look a little bit at that. Or maybe, just trying to see here where I want to go. I have more notes than I put in my notes for today, thinking that I would run out of time, but I didn't run out of time. Oh, I know what I'd like to do. There's a story in the Bible about Jesus meeting a Roman soldier. And this is another thing that's a foundation of what we teach and who we are. And the Roman soldier comes to Jesus to tell him that his manservant is sick. And the Roman soldier says to Jesus, I know you're a busy man. I'm also a busy man. He said, but I know that when I speak my word, it is done. And I know that if you speak your word, it is also done. And Jesus says, go, your servant is healed. It is done unto you according to your belief. And he turns to his disciples and he says, never in all of Israel have I seen a man of greater faith. And he's talking about a Roman soldier. So go, it is done, is part of our teaching. It is done unto you as you believe. I get goosebumps when I say things like that because it's so powerful. So we, according to our belief, is how we outpicture. This is just the essence of who we are. You know, when I talk about science of mind to somebody that comes from a Christian background, I always say three things. One is that we teach that God is all there is. Just God, that's it. There's nothing opposite to God. There's only God. And secondly, that the kingdom of heaven is right here within us. It's present here. And the third thing, it is done unto you as you believe. All three of those things are teachings directly out of the teachings of Jesus. So those are the three things that I like to use when I'm sharing with a Christian person, because they get all those things, right? But especially that last one, and that's why it's so important that we look at what are our beliefs? What is it we're believing about ourselves, and what are we believing about life? And that's so much of what he taught. So, you know, I think that kind of just sums it all up for me anyway. How about for you? So that story is very, very powerful. I just want to see what else I can do here in our short amount of time. Any other questions? Or I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because I don't want to... Yes?
The prodigal son is my favorite. I use it constantly, every Father's Day, as a matter of fact. But I never... it shows you where my paradigm are. I never thought of the mother.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, which didn't really work for me, when I thought, I've never it never dawned on me about a mother presence. I guess I just assumed she was dead or something. I don't know what. But do you know more about her mother, the mother in that? Or are we all just assuming?
No, we're only just assuming, but when you think about how the Bible was written down by men, you know, it would be easy to leave the mother out because, you know, women were chattel. You know, their job was to keep the house clean, raise children, you know, give birth to children. And, you know, that was their life, to be silent in the temple, you know, all of those things. They were to be, you know, not seen and not heard, just, you know, show up and do the work. So it's no surprise that she was left out. But I like to bring her into the story because she's so much a part of it. If there was anyone that was going to embrace that son when he came back, it was going to be her. You know, as a mom, I can tell you, I raised two boys. There were times when both of them I would have, at the same time, liked to have hit him over the head and hugged him at the same time. You know, so I know how that is. You know, and when one of them strays, how your heart aches. So I know that they need to be included in the story. So she's always included in mine. So, anything else, Rita?
I'm just feeling, I'm very touched by all this. Thank you, Dr. Peggy, because I feel like it's really opened me up to know that even though we're listening to all these different interpretations, and this one said that, and this Bible says that, and all of this, is that the real truth is, even, you know, Dr. Peggy up there telling us what she thinks, us all sharing the real truth of the whole message is that we get the opportunity to choose for ourselves, to go within and find out what we think, because that Christ consciousness is right here, and we get to tune into it and get our own interpretation of what's true or what's not true. Right. And I just love that. I just really feel it, and I feel I was always brought to tears at one moment because I feel like that presence, that Christ presence, has been here so strongly with us, in us, through you. Yeah. So thank you for this opening. Yeah, because it's what it's really all about, is us intuiting.
Yeah, thank you. That's making me tear up. Yeah, that's what I want to bring to people. Is, you know, a new viewpoint and a new way of looking, so that when you go back to read the Bible again, you see it from completely new eyes, and really get that deeper understanding of what it is, and also be able to say, you know, nah, I don't accept that, and it's okay. Don't accept it. Stephanie.
I like what Patrick said about the feminine being kind of left out of the Bible, and it's true because it's very patriarchal. The whole society the last 2,000 years has been quite patriarchal. What I got out of my upbringing, my church, was that she was never spoken of because she was too sacred to be brought into a world that didn't have any kind of thought process that could invoke her. She was too sacred, so she wasn't brought in, but that she was very, very, like almost like considered the Holy Ghost. It was like she was part of the Trinity all along. Anyway.
I personally see that as patriarchal, but that's me.
This has been really great. Just a couple of things that I just wanted to comment on. When we think of the Gospels, we often say Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But it's my understanding that Mark was actually written first. And I think it's very interesting when you go, if you read them, Mark has an entirely different image of Jesus than John. But we kind of think, we got to read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But if you read Mark first, you see more of Jesus the man. And that Matthew and Luke have very much a lot of similarities. They borrowed from each other. And next week I'm going to bring my parallel Bible that has all of the different versions. I'll show you that. And the other comment about Spong, I think I'm stealing this from him, but I use this term a lot. Do you take the Bible literally? No, I take the Bible too seriously to take it literally. Yeah, I think, like I said, I think, and I use that all the time because we've used this word interpretation to mean kind of what the words from the Greek or the Hebrew, how they were translated into English. But we also each bring the gift of interpretation to our reading of Scripture. And I'll just use the centurion. When you understand that the word that was used for my servant in the Greek could also have meant lover. So as a gay man, I can read that story and find, why was this Roman why would he even care about his servant, to go to Jesus? But with my gay interpretation, you see, I can look at that story and see how he really cared for him, how he may have loved him, and was able to take the risk of going to Jesus and, So I'm not just saying that we just do that with gay stuff, but we all can read the stories from our own mindset, our own place in the world, and find meaning. And that's what I think is really wonderful about both the Hebrew and the Christian scriptures.
Thank you, Walt.
Thank
I'm
you,
going to
Walter.
see it that way from now on. It just makes so much sense to me.
Now we've all
Wow.
changed our whole thing on I'm going. What it made me think of is on Sundays when we give the message, and you're standing back there, and everybody comes up and says something to you, and it's not always what the message was, but it's what they got out of it.
Right,
And
right.
so it really, our new thing is we're only responsible for the delivery of the message.
Exactly.
Not responsible for how you receive it. And so I always wanted you to get it the way I'm saying it. And then I'm thinking, no, that is not how it even works. It's about opening up enough to deliver a message to allow you to embody it, for you to be able to use it in your life. And that is just wonderful. Another example. How could we ever say that that is the word?
Right.
And then in our philosophy, science, mind, and spirit, the word is God. So whatever word you are speaking, that in spiritual mind treatment, we do that is the word of not a God outside, but that is the word of God. So you take all those words and you turn them into one thing, and that is spirit.
Yeah.
So wow, yeah, very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. We'll close with a prayer. I just want to ask you I'm not going to load you with homework. If you were doing my 8-week class, you'd be reading a whole lot more than this. But next week, we're going to look at a number of things, but we're going to look at the Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount as one of the things that we're going to talk about next week. So do read Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. I put 5:16. Read the whole chapter of Matthew 5. That's what I should be saying. So,
And you can find it online.
Matthew chapter
free.
5. True, yeah. So, and you can go online. You can get it on Bible Gateway if you don't have a Bible. And it doesn't matter what Bible you do have, it's okay, just read it. And then we're going to go into more depth about that next week and look at it a little more metaphysically, and then we're going to do some other things too next week. But we will be talking about Jesus the Radical next week. So, passive resistor. Yeah, I'd like to have that so that I can just study a little bit and know where I want to go with you, because I call this a roadmap, but we might take some side trips. So, thank you so much. Let's just take a moment to close. My heart is so full in this moment right now, filled with gratitude and filled with love, as we have begun this journey to have a deeper understanding of this Christ person, this Jesus the Christ, this master teacher, this way shower, who, in the words of John Shelby Spong, loved wastefully. That was the truth of who he was. He teaches us how to live and love from that space of openness and open heart, and to know that who we are, just as we are, is already whole and perfect in the eyes of the Christ. And so as we take this time today to have shared together and have come together, we now bless this time and know that it is complete as we each go our own way this week, perhaps walking a little more gently upon the earth. So with love and gratitude, we let this time together be, saying it was good and very good, and joining together in agreement by saying, and so it is. Thank you.